everybody. Thank you for your patience. Today, we welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Rakesh Periwal, sir. With rich 14 years clinical experience, Dr. Periwal is working as a consultant intensivist based at Guwahati. Today, it's our pleasure that Dr. Periwal gave us some time from his busy schedule. Let's start today's discussion topic on cytokine storm syndrome. Thank you, sir. Please.
Thank you. I welcome all of you to this forum. And we are going to talk about cytokine storm syndrome, the one term which has gained a lot of relevance because of COVID-19. And it can actually be called an immunological storm syndrome. I think that better defines the term. And how this term came into use is because of historical reasons. If you look at what CSS defines, is dysregulated immune response marked by excessive pro-inflammation and incited by various stimuli. This stimuli has been genetic disorders, autoimmune diseases, hematological malignancies, and we have talked about this in infectious diseases also, specifically in relation to ARDS, where we think ARDS itself can initiate inflammation and inflammation can worsen the ARDS. And we know the major problem in COVID-19 is ARDS, one aspect, but there is a whole gamut to it along with ARDS. It has been seen in SARS-CoV-1 and H1N1 before, and people have used immune-directed therapies before as well, but never has been talked in the way we are doing now. There are many distinct clinical entities. They are very different from each other. We will just give you a historical perspective, but what they share is some common laboratory and clinical features. And in the context of infection, it may be considered another manifestation of sepsis, extension of sepsis, maybe something which sepsis rolls in. But here we are not focusing on the microbe and antimicrobial, which we had always been doing. What we are talking mainly about is dysregulated immune response leading to multi-organ failure. We had a poll when we started, and I just want to know how many of you have come across the term cytokine storm syndrome prior to COVID-19? Well, I personally didn't know much. I'll just put the poll. I'd like to have your response, and then we will continue to share what the inputs have been from participants. The classic...
All means if you answer the poll.
Pardon?
Sir has started the poll. All please, if you answer the poll.
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody
is answering.
Oh, majority is with me. That okay. Okay. Almost 3/4 say they haven't heard. Oh, 1/4 they say. So we are learned audience. We will be having a lot of interaction probably in between at the end, and we'd like to know your inputs. If you look at one prototype which describes CSS, it's hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis. It's not a malignant disorder. It's a polyclonal problem. But the hallmark of this is dysregulated T cell activity, mainly the cytotoxic T cells, the natural killer cells, and activated macrophages. And some of the diagnostic criteria, the lab abnormalities were actually related to HLH, what they were identified, like the elevated ferritin levels, the triglycerides, the fibrinogen. And this HLH maybe is a more pure entity among the cytokine storm syndrome, because there are certain genetically linked HLH, and also HLH can be incited by viral infections, by hematological malignancies, and also has been defined by autoimmune disorders. If you look at the term, it was actually the hemophagocytosis demonstrated in the bone marrow from which the term came, although that is not imperative to be present to diagnose HLH. So we know about the presence of these macrophages in the bone marrow engulfing all the cells, and that is where the idea of the cytopenias came. So traditionally HLH is all about cytopenias, anemia, thrombocytopenia, and leukopenia, but we know now it's also about leukocytosis. And a similar entity is macrophage activation syndrome, similar name. Some people say it is actually a part of the HLH, or maybe it's a different entity, but MAS mainly had been described for rheumatological diseases, especially juvenile idiopathic arthritis. And here also the name came from the demonstration of activated macrophages. And one of the major ways we picked it up by bone marrow evaluation and by looking at the cytopenias. You also have hepatosplenomegaly and lymphadenopathy in these disorders. And the other major manifestations in neurological abnormalities, which some people say is due to the disease or maybe due to the treatment used for this disease. Another clearer picture came with this T cell directed immune gated cancer therapies. CAR T cell inhibition is one of them, and there are approved drugs to treat this cytokine storm syndrome. There are guidelines in place to identify the cytokine release syndrome, we call it, because it is more predictable and it occurs much more frequently in these patients. Almost 1/4 of the patients may have a cytokine release syndrome here. And there, the major problem was T cell dysregulation. So everything boils down probably to T cell dysregulation. And it is here tocilizumab is actually approved as a therapy. That is where we borrowed the idea of tocilizumab in cytokine storm syndrome. And steroids. Steroids is a cornerstone of therapy in HLH MAS. And we also know that how steroids have changed the game in COVID-19. We also talk of sepsis and ARDS related, and here the major focus had been interleukin 6. Probably we borrowed the idea of interleukin 6 from the other entities, and here there was dramatic elevations in interleukin 6, somewhere in hundreds and thousands, unless like what we see in COVID-19. And this has produced a tremendous overlap with sepsis. Here actually the initiating event is sepsis. And what we fear most is what is causing the deterioration. Is it secondary sepsis, or is it an immunological storm which has happened? Because the markers also have overlaps, like the cytopenias or leukocytosis, the elevations in CRP, which has gained major place, probably because interleukin causes release of hepatic acute phase reactants, and we know CRP is one of them. And our understanding of the same from the SARS-CoV-1 and H1N1. And this time we are talking about COVID-19. Lab parameters, traditionally interleukin 6, because it can also be measured. I'm happy to say that we measure it in many labs in Guwahati as well, and we get a report in few hours. Then there is mention of tumor necrosis factor, interferons, elevated IL-6, many other interleukins are there. But we need to understand that they are not necessarily pro or anti-inflammatory. They have a lot of pleiotropic effects. So to label IL-6 just as a pro-inflammatory cytokine, probably it simplifies the way we understand, but the immune system is more complex than this partitioning of pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines. We are only learning. And coagulation activation. There was one molecule which actually found a mention in guideline, activated protein C. Somehow it went into disrepute. But that tells you that we have been looking at dysregulated coagulation for a long time now, maybe 2 decades now. And here we are looking at elevated D dimers and low fibrinogen as one of the major markers, and D dimer being used in more than one ways. Traditionally, D dimer was used in patients who had a low probability of venous thrombosis and a negative D dimer just to rule out DVT. But here we are looking at D dimers to identify cytokine storm, that is number one, to also regulate the intensity of anticoagulation. We had only prophylactic and therapeutic anticoagulation. But if you look in COVID-19, people have used, let's say, enoxaparin 40 milligram subcut OD as a prophylactic dose. They have increased the dose to 40 milligram subcut BD as well. And some have actually also used the 1 milligram per kg body weight subcut BD dose, even in the absence of demonstrated deep vein thrombosis. And people have used the D dimer levels for extended anticoagulation after discharge from hospital. So anyone above 2 times the level above normal or just 4 times above the normal without anything else were also considered for an extended thromboprophylaxis. And this has gained attention because we are seeing people being discharged from hospitals and again coming back because of severe hypoxia, hypertension, and we do not know it is basically because of pulmonary thrombosis which sets in because their anticoagulation got discontinued after discharge. We will also get to know more about it in times. Cytopenias, as I said, bilineage was what was needed, but with COVID, the interesting part is leukocytosis and leukopenia. Bone marrow, we don't do it anymore, but hemophagocytosis, that's where the term came from, demonstrable. The major difference is that these patients with HLH and MAS do not have such an aggressive course. So you get enough time to do the bone marrow evaluation, to look at the changes, maybe things happening in days, but in cytokine storm, things are happening in hours. So we need markers which have a greater turnaround time. And we have used CRP. Some have used levels of 50, some have used levels of 75. That's in the recovery trial. And ferritin, more than 500 is generally what we use. And people have also graded it as more than 500, more than thousands to look at the severity of inflammation. We also have tissue injury markers. Troponin I may be marker of myocarditis or even with demonstrable normal myocardial function in echo, but it could be used as something which identifies tissue injury. Serum LDH, which has been used from before and also now, elevated liver enzymes, including bilirubin as well. So you have all these markers, and the interesting part is guidelines now asking you to do them on a regular interval, maybe 48 to 72 hours. That's what the Government of India guidelines tells you. Fasting triglycerides, we have used them. In my lifetime, I have seen only 2 patients with cytokine storm syndrome, and both were related to hematological malignancies, and a third patient who had an MAS where we saw that the triglyceride levels were elevated. CSF pleocytosis mainly because of the neurological manifestations in many, and we do a CSF workup just to rule out CNS infection. But what we found was CSF pleocytosis, which has been documented in other immunological disorders as well, like Guillain-Barré. In infections, and specifically in the current era of COVID-19, what brings cytokine storm syndrome into attention is fever, hypoxia, and hypotension. And all therapies have taken hypoxia as one of the crucial indicators for initiation of the anti-inflammatory therapy, be it dexamethasone, be it plasma, be it uh, the absorption columns, be it tocilizumab or other directed therapies, and starting everything before organ failure sets in. So it is giving us an idea that start early before the patient probably goes into mechanical ventilator or they require high oxygen therapy. If you look at the US approvals for remdesivir now, the priority is given to actually patients who are early into the disease, just requiring low flow oxygen. And if you have to choose between someone who is already ventilated and doing bad with organ failure, you may not get remdesivir if there is a short supply, and it might be directed to someone who is just having hypoxia. This tells you intervening in time really helps. Encephalopathy, well, I don't know how much it is seen in COVID-19, but they are more related to the other entities which we have talked of, and hepatosplenomegaly, probably not something that we see in a disease which has a stormy course as in COVID-19. Can we take the other poll now? The second question. Okay, I think we will get the poll done, and I will go into the next part of my presentation, and that is the context of uh, COVID-19. One is the guidelines, which is asking us to look at inflammation. Never have I seen this kind of an approach: ferritin, LDH, CRP, blood count, STROPA, interleukin 6, liver enzyme. Someone asking you to do it on a daily basis also. And they have also highlighted tracking these inflammatory parameters so that you detect changes fast and take strategic actions accordingly. And that's their steroids, the master anti-inflammatory drug, uh, which has actions on probably all, and it might be directed to someone who is just having hypoxia. And The only therapy which has shown mortality benefit, steroid works on antibody mediated disorders, T cell mediated disorders. We have used them for myriad conditions, and here we used now in probably the relevance is cytokine storm early in the disease, and the recovery trial, which was actually stopped early because of a benefit shown, especially in patients who were ventilated and patients who were requiring oxygen therapy, but not early in the disease. And the interesting part was most of the beneficiaries were actually into the second week of their illness when steroid initiation showed maximum benefit. Maybe that tells you that cytokine storm syndrome sets in a little late in COVID 19. Maybe early few days, the picture is more lucid, and then you get this mess of things happening late in the course, maybe end of the first week, start of the second week, somewhere like that. And tocilizumab, as I said, an approved drug which was there for CAR cell T related CRS, was now extrapolated to COVID 19. But the interesting part is none of the trials want you to check the IL-6 levels prior to initiation of tocilizumab. I draw an analogy between probably statins and the cholesterol levels. So if you have ischemic heart disease, oh, no point of checking the levels, start a statin. Same is here. If you think of a cytokine storm syndrome, maybe the IL-6 levels may not help. Interestingly, the elevations in IL-6 levels and mortality may not be linear. And there is a JAMA paper which I had made a reference to, which shows that the IL-6 level elevation is very modest, maybe 5 to 10 times, 20 times, unless seen in other ARDS models where it is 50 to 100 times or even 1,000 times. And so we had another drug which came into picture, itolizumab, the CD6 inhibitor, which is biosimilar, marketed in India now, used earlier for psoriasis. I think it has a timeline of 5 to 6 years now, and it is being used in cytokine storm syndrome. And eculizumab is another, which is the complement directed pathway target, the C5 inhibitor, used in paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria and now being tried in clinical trials in COVID 19. How to rule out infection? This gathers a lot of importance, because if you are using these targeted therapies, at least they have an action which lingers on for very long. So if you give tocilizumab, now your patients might be at increased risk for infection, not for a few days, but maybe for a few weeks. And if they already had an infection, they may have a very bad course. But how to distinguish? Very, very difficult. I think both the clinical and lab parameters should be taken hand in hand to look at infections. Here, probably one important mention is that of steroids. Steroids causes leukocytosis, so that marker may not be very helpful. Steroids also cause lymphopenia, and neutrophil lymphocyte ratios have been used to mark severity. But once you have started steroids, maybe that would be very difficult. The other thing about steroids is the long duration of action. Tocilizumab single dose, only 2 days, two doses maybe 12 or 24 hours apart, and you have a dampened immune response for weeks. With steroids, maybe, oh, you can have a daily look at improvement, stop or start maybe at wish. We use it mainly for 5 to 7 days, but that's what the Indian guidelines say. But in the recovery trial, they were used for 10 days, and they used a fixed dose of steroid there, 6 milligrams of dexamethasone, IV or oral. And one of the problems with these immune modulating therapies is also decreased viral clearance. That is why nobody has tried high dose of steroids, those pulse dose steroids which we have used in other conditions. And the overlap with sepsis markers, the same marker, Procal has been used as a distinguishing marker. So we may feel a inhibition with elevated Procals to use these immune modulating therapies, but I don't know how true is that. And obviously the cultures and other clues that we have for sepsis, bacterial markers, maybe fungal markers may be used here as well for distinguishing. But the problem is we need to make decisions in hours. Days may be too long for making decisions, and that is where things only become more complex. Just highlighting the differences, we already talked neutrophilia, lymphopenia, IL-6 modest is elevation, and thrombosis is unusually high, which is very, very interesting. Nowhere where we use therapeutic anticoagulation with that intensity and interest that we have in COVID-19, and some of the biopsies of lung lesions in these people have shown extensive thrombosis of the pulmonary bed. So we are not just talking about the big leg veins, we are also talking of the smaller veins, the smaller caliber vessels, even the arteries. And does arterial thrombosis take place, and what is the rationale? Well, it could still be endothelial dysfunction, maybe related to the cytokine storm that these patients have. Another marker which is used is low albumin and hyponatremia, which would be indicators of capillary leak, which is also said is seen in COVID-19. And here people have even used fibrinolytic therapies for refractory hypoxia, highlighting that probably there is extensive thrombosis of the pulmonary bed which is causing hypoxia, and that may not be corrected by mechanical ventilation. Here you may like fibrinolytic. Marik has also published his series of cases where they have used fibrinolytic therapy for improvement of hypoxia. So the anticoagulation cascade is getting a lot of attention. There is mention about use of tranexamic acid, not in the context of DIC, but bleeding with COVID-19. So you can actually also have bleeding with these patients. And DIC picture is very difficult to pick because you have elevated D dimers and low fibrinogen as part of the CS cytokine storm syndrome also. What is interesting to know that everything has been in and around hypoxia. So the onset of hypoxia has been used as a marker for dexamethasone therapy, for tocilizumab, for itolizumab, for plasma therapy. Everywhere we have used. So anybody requiring oxygen would qualify as moderate to severe COVID and becomes a candidate for CSS. So the distinctions are very, very blurred. You don't need too many markers to initiate therapy. You may be technically right, legally right to initiate these therapies once you label them as moderate to severe COVID-19. And it is a rapid downhill course. That is what people have said. I am in the uphill course now because we are very new to COVID-19 here in Guwahati. I will have, I think, a lot of people who might throw light. We will discuss about their experiences. When we come to the end of it, we are almost reaching end, and the urgency, how urgently they have felt the need to initiate therapy. CRP has been cited as an important marker, especially if it is normal to begin with and there is an elevation, and there are dramatic elevations. Within a day or two, you have levels jumping from normal to 50 to 100 times. Maybe you can use that in a select group of patients. Tocilizumab, well, there's a Lancet Rheumatology paper published June 24, 2020, which has shown benefit. I think the recovery trial also has a tocilizumab AM, and they have a secondary randomization in patients who did not improve with their first line randomization. And the choice, desaturation, PO2 FR2 less than 300, very common. More than 50% infiltrates on X-ray, and avoided those on steroids, but sequential use has also been seen with steroids. And there are both IV and subcut preparations, and both have been used. Please look at the routes that you use and the dosages because they change. People have used 8 milligrams per kg per body weight to a maximum of 800, and some have used body weight guidelines using 400, 600, and 800 as dosages. Only thing is avoid when the creatinine clearance is less than 13. Active hepatitis. This is very tricky because hepatic inflammation has been cited as part of the CSS. But anybody above 5 times normal levels of enzymes, or you may better withhold therapy with tocilizumab. You may be on the wrong side of the law, even if they're on the wrong side of science. And those with severe hematological derangements, mostly neutrophils less than somebody using 1,000, somebody using 500, platelets 1 lakh to 50,000, and active inflammatory bowel disease, because there has been case reports of perforation in these patients with their previous use. So anybody who has underlying disease which can cause a bowel perforation, especially inflammatory bowel disease, please stop yourself from using tocilizumab. Itolizumab is interesting because DGC has given an approval and it was just tried on 30 patients. almost a prospective trial. 20 patients received the drug and 10 patients didn't, and they said, oh, all the 20 patients did very well. I could not find any publication, although there is a clinical registry with an ongoing trial in Cuba, and actually Biocon has used earlier also this drug in Cuba with a 200 milligram dose. Although their boss said four vials, actually it comes to 8 vials of 25 milligrams each, and this may be repeated at 72 hours if need be. Tried for both hypoxic patients and also for those showing macrophage activation syndrome like picture. So they just extended the gamut in which you can use itolizumab. Steroids, oh, we have already discussed. And not to start too early maybe, but we are tempted now to start in most hospitalized patients. And in India, we are using both Dexa and methylprednisolone. In pregnant women in recovery trial also, they had used methylprednisolone at a dose of 40 milligrams per day. And anybody requiring oxygen is a candidate. The best part is steroids, you can take a daily call, and probably the immune upset may not be as great. I don't know, but we are probably more comfortable. They are available just at a call, so they can be given very easily, low cost. We are very familiar with their use. So almost everybody with COVID-19 hospitalized hypoxic are receiving steroids. I don't know of any exceptions. Plasma therapy is interesting because it not only gives you those antibodies which can neutralize the virus, it actually also has immune modulating properties. There is an ongoing ILBS trial with actually 2 shots of plasma, 200 to 250 ml. They have mentioned 250 ml, 24 hours apart, and it has shown mortality benefit in previous viral illness. There is an Argentine hemorrhagic fever where they had shown some benefit, SARS-CoV-1, H1N1, and so plasma therapy is being used. Convalescent plasma is now available because we are very late into COVID. A lot of donors are available, easily available, and the therapy can be given simple, low cost, probably less harmful, maybe. I don't know about that, but we got to know that it not only has anti-infective property but also has immunomodulation as one of its mechanism. Use early, same thing, and sequentially maybe steroids and then plasma therapy, maybe tocilizumab. We will have papers talking about cocktail therapy now where multiple agents are used. Well, we will only know with time. And then plasma column therapies also. So Cytosorb is having an urgent US FDA approval. We have ulinastatin used in both the traditional 2 lakh IV TDS dose and people using in 10 lakh IV TDS dose as well, 5 days, and then down titrating the dose, using it for 10 days or maybe till patient is hospitalized, whichever is shorter. And most of them have used timing as the most important parameters. That you got to time it right. No point starting it late. But then the benefits after multiple organ failure sets in. So one organ only, look at lungs, just look at oxygens and start therapy. Use lab parameters along with, mainly to rule out sepsis. And most papers have discussed in terms of survival, although that may not be the only indicator we use. We can also use ventilator free days and hospital stay, because we know cost of therapy as well as length of stay may be something we need to bargain between. And the caution which comes with my last words: increased risk of infection, which can actually stay for very long. So you might recover from COVID and actually die due to a secondary infection just because you are not a candidate for the immune modulating therapies. I think I'm done with my presentation. We can take the poll questions.
Yeah, sir, one person wanted, so we can start the poll. Yeah, has anyone treated a patient with macrophage activation syndrome? So,
There's 100% saying no.
everybody's saying no.
I fall into the other 100% because I had one patient whom I had the chance, and there we had actually a marrow manifestation. That was a rare hematological malignancy. The patient survived and underwent. We gave high dose immune therapies. Okay, there are some yes responses coming. That is very interesting. So we have seen macrophage activation syndrome. I have seen in adult Still's disease and in hematologic malignancies, and that was both we came to know because we had a marrow picture.
So So we end the poll. The results will be 86% says no and 13% says yes. They have
Yes.
had treated a patient with macrophage activation syndrome. So do we go to the next poll?
Yes.
Has anyone got experience with plasma therapy this time or before?
And we can actually have someone talking on it also, because a lot of yeses. Somebody wants to say something on it.
Yeah, if it is for everyone who have joined us, if you want to speak, if you want to share your experience with Dr. Periwal and others, you have to press the request to speak button on your right hand side screen, and then you have to follow the instructions given to come in live and speak with us. Please press the request to speak button on the right hand side of your screen. Yeah. And please follow the instructions the webinar portal is sharing with you so that you can get into the room and speak with us.
Lot of yeses, I see 28%. That's a huge number.
Yeah, so we will end the poll right here. So the answer is yes, 28%, no, 71%.
Somebody has raised a hand, I think.
Yeah, we have given the entrance. The person will take some time to reach inside.
Okay.
So can we go to the next poll, or you want to share your
Yes.
experience, Dr.
Oh no, very few experiences. We have a plasma bank here in our uh, town, which is being run by the government, another in the private sector. Our own hospital is having the apheresis facility for getting plasma. We
Okay.
have used plasma, but experience is too much of a term to use, because ours is only maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks now that we have started using. Ashish Sharma has joined the room.
Hi, Dr. Ashish.
Okay, we can have the next poll coming as well, maybe, and
Yeah,
we can have.
another person also want to speak, I think. That will take some time, but we can take the poll in the meantime. Are you convinced that inflammation needs to be controlled in sepsis for better outcomes?
I think we'll have a lot of yes. Yeah.
100%.
I personally think this will get extrapolated in almost all sepsis now. And
Yeah.
we will have more anti-inflammatory therapies than antimicrobials. Anyway, we are running out of them. So it is actually better to look at something else which can provide to the patient.
Actually. So 91% says, 89% says a yes, and 10% says a no. That is it.
Yeah, that was the 4 poll questions.
Yeah. So if anybody comes and joins, in the meanwhile, let us take questions which we already have. We have questions.
I can see Dr. Partho Pratim Ghosh is my fellow consultant here. Can you get him to talk?
Yeah, we really can. Yeah.
Or there is Brojan Lakar also. Some of my fellow colleagues are here.
Yeah. We have tried to take both of them in.
Yes.
Anybody who presses the request button, please follow the instructions given in your screen, and please enter the room. First question is from Trupti Padhi. A very simple question, but I would love Dr. Periwal to answer. What is hypoxia, sir?
Oh, well, we have used saturation. Anybody having a drop in the PO2 levels, they have used the PO2 FiO2 actually as the marker, less than 300, to define hypoxia. And in terms of saturation, because I don't know how good these probes are in the presence of hypotension or circulatory insufficiency, but anything 94% would qualify as hypoxia. So PO2 FiO2 less than 300 and SpO2 less than maybe 95 would qualify hypoxia. So anybody requiring oxygen for that matter would be considered hypoxic.
So the next question is from Mr. Ashish Sharma. How long steroids can be given and what will be the dosage?
Say the trial says 10 days. So 10 days is what recovery use, 6 milligrams fixed dose. We can use 6 to 24 milligram. Dr. Brojan has joined the room. He would like to answer. And people have used steroids for 5 days also. So you are in your right to use anywhere between 5 to 10 days. No tapering, no mention of tapering doses, but prolonging beyond that.
And is there any benefit of early steroid therapy in mild to moderate disease?
Mild to no. And that was basically because they say if you start very early, then it might actually help the virus to replicate. And if you look at recovery, there was a very good mention of this. The benefit was not seen. Actually, they showed a little bit, not statistically significant, but worse outcomes in patients who were started on steroids without hypoxia.
Okay.
Hello, Rakesh.
Yes, Brinda, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Again, a nice talk. In fact, just one thing. Can you say it cytokine release syndrome, or is it simply cytokine storm instead of saying that cytokine storm syndrome? Rakesh?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, one thing. Just the nomenclature actually. Can we call it cytokine release syndrome instead of, because storm is a storm. It's a cytokine storm.
Yeah.
What do you say? Is it only cytokine storm or it's a cytokine release syndrome?
Or you can say both maybe, sir. I don't know.
Okay.
Release was because the T cell therapy, there was a directed therapy against T cells only. And so they came up with the term release. They said it is predictable. And when it goes out of bounds, then it becomes a storm kind and you treat them with tocilizumab. So they had used the term cytokine release syndrome.
Okay.
And in other places, mostly the term uses cytokine storm, just to tell you that probably it's very stormy. At least in COVID-19, it's very stormy. So maybe
why Rakesh, just I have one query. Any modulation of immune modulation in a infectious state or sepsis state, if we call it a viral sepsis, it's a septic state. Okay.
Yes.
Any immune modulation in a septic state, we have burnt our finger in Zygris experience, you know.
Yes.
So because the ultimately the biggest study, they have come up with a independent study, I'll say, that this modulation of immunomodulation will not help, rather it will burn our finger. So the cytokine storm control in another, like in a chemotherapy or in a cancer therapy, this is something different. But if we call it in a sepsis, the whole normal person, suppose a otherwise healthy person, his response may be a self-limiting, okay, even if it is very sick. Do you consider that this should be modulated? Because it's too early, because most of the studies are experience based on a retrospective one. Prospective large studies, RCT is still lacking. So we cannot jump on that. See, the controversy is that if all the early cases you take, healthy individual you take, as to just follow up, they may even respond to without the basic therapy we are just discussing. Instead of modulating it, where probably the outcome modulation, where to modulate, that has to be specified. Maybe in a very sick patient, not otherwise healthy, someone who is having cancer and extremely sick, his cytokine response may not be adequate. So that's why it has to be specified as far as I understand the thing. It's not that I will use Tosi for each and every cases early, which is going to moderate severity. What do you say?
That is very interesting. That is very interesting. So basically, you are not going to use that day one. And if you look at the recovery trial also, no benefit with mild disease, and maximum benefit was actually seen in patients who were initiated on steroid into the second week of illness. I don't know if the cytokine storm happens late in the course of the disease, or actually early intervention with immunomodulatory therapies may be harmful. Well, this is something Brojan will be, but timing is, as you said, most important.
That's important.
Rule out, they say, still rule out an infection, but we have ruled in an infection. Already we know patient has COVID-19.
Infection.
And in spite that, so probably the most important part is somebody who deteriorates suddenly, unpredictably. worsens. And most of the people, they are interested in this because we actually did not have anything in our hands. If you look at the recovery trial also, remdesivir is not something which has approvals of the nature which we have with other antimicrobials. It's just like, okay, use it, we don't have anything else kinds. And I think it is our search for this anything else which has made us look at inflammation with everything that we have. No new drugs being used, but old drugs, some cocktails being tried. So most of them are actually not COVID specific drugs, but marking inflammation somewhere or the other. I think this will be something probably some of our other speakers who have, we are 1 month now into COVID, but some people must be 3-4 months into COVID. They can also highlight where do they think the timing is. And I think which is one of the most important guides to us, where we should consider something else. Because we might also consider antibacterial agents or scaling up the antibacterial gamut because of the risk of secondary infection. We know that it happens in influenza. So that is something which will really remain very open.
That's actually
if somebody has the answer, or if Brojendra himself has the answer, we'd like to hear.
No, just one more point I want to add, and I ask one question again. The point is that we know that the recent study on 17th actually published is in immunity. The viral replicating part of the genome, the COVID-19, is actually dead part. It's not viral replicating after 7 to 10 days time.
Yes,
also it's the dead part. It's not infecting others. That means it's almost self-limiting disease. Okay. So if we give TOSI in the day 8 maybe, where probably viral replication is not there. The point is that this viral replication, this viral infection, we know that the later part they may have gram-positive infection and gram-positive sepsis very high. We have that experience in influenza. Okay. So if we give TOSI, then risk of sepsis, really bacterial sepsis in the later half will be extremely high.
Very high.
That's why I have a strong reservation against using this molecule to control the second peak, because we don't know when the second peak is because of virus or because of bacteria.
Infection. True.
So
true.
that's what my comment is. Actually, I just leave it for the thought of other esteemed participant here, and I'd like to have comments on that. Thank you. Thank you, Rakesh.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to say something on this, because we want to learn from each other? Or anybody has any other query?
Next question.
Query about the invasive ventilation or CPAP. What would we like to use first? Definitely non-invasive. And I think high flow nasal oxygen therapy has assumed a lot of significance or maybe attention, because these patients may not have non-compliant. That is what our early experience is. The lungs are not so non-compliant, but the major problem is hypoxia. So if you can beat it by the patient having spontaneous breathing, oh, so much the good. So I think we got to be trying. There was a lot of reservation about NIV because of the aerosolization issues, but we are using NIV and high flow. Somebody has asked, pregnant women suffering COVID-19, how much DEXA? No DEXA, methylprednisolone, 40 milligrams. That was what was used in the recovery trial.
Okay. Vijay Salla has asked, after 2 weeks of COVID, can we suspect the cytokine storm syndrome?
Yeah, why not? I will tell you my example. I'll give you one patient, our known to 10th day, mild disease, just because we have institutional quarantine mandatory in Assam, in the hospital, having a CRP jump from 0.5 to 50 to 180, having an IL-6 jump, which was 3 times, having hypoxia on the 10th day, and actually improving with tocilizumab and the higher dose of steroid, that is the 2 milligram methylprednisolone over 24 hours. So that is the best that I have seen, 10th day. So there are case reports of people actually getting discharged and actually coming back with shock hypoxia. which,
Okay.
as somebody said, okay, secondary bacterial infection, but the rapid downhill course, which is more dramatic, that they reach hospital and die. This is not something we have seen in secondary bacterial infections. Patients dying in 24 hours, discharge patients coming back. They give us time, that we are able to manage them somehow. But here we are seeing deaths in a day or two. Or I
Day or
think inflammation is one thing which can get you die in a day or two and have a rapid downhill course. I think that part is something which should get more attention. The profile of how bad the patient is deteriorating, how fast, and what probably explains everything happening together, hypoxia and hypotension, I say, because hypotension here with hypoxia is actually an indicator of capillary leak, and that probably would be more due to inflammation than anything else. I mean, I can have the opinion of someone else on it.
I don't think anybody else is here to speak right now. Can we take some other questions?
Yes,
Dr.
yes, yes,
Parthasatim
yes.
Ghosh has asked, can you give tocilizumab in patients already on steroid,
Yes,
which
yes,
tend to start early?
yes. And that is the secondary randomization or recovery. Yes, you can use. No problem.
So now Mr. Ashish Sharma is asking, do steroids slow the viral clearance? I got positive on 8th July, started with DEXA from 9th. My fifth sample on 20th July is still positive.
Positive. Yes, yes. That is true. And that is where high dose steroids were basically withheld. Early steroid therapy without hypoxia are not encouraged, because we believe that the virus replication may increase. And we have known steroids, we have already had fear of steroids. If you look at the H1N1, we almost held ourselves blocking use steroids, saying, oh, people had worse outcomes. So probably the timing was not appropriate in them. So maybe the timing, when you're losing patients, when a hypoxic patient, you do not fear about virus clearances at all. The other interesting part is, what do you look for as a test for the virus persistence? Because the RT-PCRs, what we have seen, stays positive for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, otherwise also, even without the use of steroid.
Okay. So
We have stopped.
Dr. Roslin is asking, what are the things to look before giving second dose of tocilizumab?
Response. If there is, the second dose should be 12 to 24 hours. That is a window period, and that is basically related to the pharmacokinetics of the drug. That is number one. And number two, you look at the response. Now, response here is again hypoxia, because hypoxia was your initiation point. So if you see a response in hypoxia, if you see the CRP levels coming down, if you see the leukocytosis resolving, then
Okay.
probably you are on the right path. If it has happened, don't repeat the dose. If it has not happened, maybe repeat the dose. But trials on tocilizumab have, some of them have actually used it. So they have used 2 dosage as part of the trial design. But that is
Okay.
very difficult. But what we are doing in our setup, according to the Indian guidelines, is looking at response. You can look at maybe ferritin levels. I don't know how good they change the other markers like D-dimers, maybe. I don't know about that, but definitely look into CRP and resolution of leukocytosis, 2 of them. And most importantly, hypoxia. If the hypoxia is improving, then probably we were in the right path in the inflammatory cascade, and we stopped at the right time, which actually prevented the progression of hypoxia.
Okay. Now we'll come to plasma therapy questions. Trupti Padhi is asking, sir, is there any sort of contraindication for diabetic or hypertension or fatty liver diseases patients to be treated by plasma therapy for COVID positive cases?
No. If you look at absolute contraindication for plasma therapy, it is IgA deficiency, because these
Okay.
patients have severe allergic reactions to plasma therapy. So anybody suspected of higher allergic reactions to plasma therapy, yes. Otherwise, absolutely no. You can use it in almost all patients.
Isha Garg asks, how many plasma therapy sessions can be given?
Who is what we know?
Isha Garg asks, how many plasma therapy sessions can be given?
Till now, 200 to 250 ml each session, 2 sessions.
Now, another very simple yet important question. Jyoti Pachicha asks you, what is immunomodulation?
immunomodulation is using some immunomodulatory drugs maybe.
Yes.
Here we think we have a very balanced approach that we can tune down the anti-inflammation, we can tune down the pro-inflammation. Probably doesn't work that way. So immunomodulation is probably best described as any therapy which are directed against the inflammatory cascade. We have named a few. There are lots of many drugs, and toying with that idea, with looking at certain markers to see that we have brought in a favorable change. I am saying we are taming the immune response of our body to the best levels so that we kill the virus, get ourselves better, and still do not die because of a response of our body itself. I can see a query by Deepam Sharma is rapid increase of inflammatory markers without hypoxia. Should we intervene or no? We have a patient now, him we did not intervene. His CRP levels were high, 65, 10th day of illness, having fever, normal counts. We said, okay, we will do your tests more frequently, but we didn't intervene. And we actually found that the level started decreasing. Because the problem, as we says, is immune modulation looks very easy to give the drug, but we need to know that you are at an increased risk of infections. So be balanced in your approach. Maybe without hypoxia, I don't think none of the guidelines mention. I'm not happy because for me, probably the most important thing is hypoxia, unless there is hypotension. Then it's a different issue because maybe both of them can be used interchangeably.
Johan Hassan asks, what is the guidelines for using low molecular weight heparin and antiplatelet if patient have any IHD?
Oh, antiplatelets have to be continued. See, this is something, if anybody requires an antiplatelet drug because of independent reasons like ischemic heart disease or stents, they should receive it. Not only for this condition, for any condition where we use anticoagulant. Antiplatelets and anticoagulations are not interchangeable. But the problem is that the risk of bleeding increases. So maybe somebody on dual antiplatelet during hospital cut down to single antiplatelet, or you can always have opinion of somebody on it. But they are both used for independent reasons.
Okay, next will be for how long you keep giving steroid post patient turns negative and is still on NIV. Babu Pathak asks this question.
Oh, 5 to 10 days. I mean, beyond that, we have not experienced, and because there is no literature, and as we said, continuing steroid therapy late into the illness, where patients are more prone to bacterial infections as day goes on, may not be a great idea. I think limiting it to 4 or 5 days, see response, stop. No need of tapering or probably continuing beyond 10 days.
Okay. Wahid Khan shares, I have used plasma therapy but haven't noticed enormous difference in patients given or not given plasma. This is Wahid Khan responding. Now Ashwin asks, role of ulinastatin in cytokine storm.
Yeah, there is an ongoing trial. Ulinastatin used in the traditional dose of 2 lakh units IV 8 hourly, and also a high dose ulinastatin trial 10 lakh units IV 8 hourly. I will tell you just an experience shared by one of my colleagues yesterday, where they used high dose ulinastatin 10 lakh units IV TDS 5 days. The patient came out of the ventilator, the hypoxia improved, they had demonstrable drop in IL-6 levels, and he thinks it is due to ulinastatin. Well, you can all go to the clinical trials and see, but these are the two trials, high dose and usual dose, and duration is 10 days or till the patient is in hospital, whichever is smaller.
Madam Madhukari Ray, she is one of the leading nursing personnel in West Bengal, asks you, can the positive patient have recurrence once negative, and within how many days?
I bow to the nursing fraternity. I've been telling, they have been the backbone of the entire system. We don't know about that. The protective immunity part is very challenging to comment on. As yet, till now, we haven't seen anybody getting reinfected. So I think that is all a concern for healthcare workers, otherwise as well, can be become reinfected. Well, I don't know. But protective immunity has also not been demonstrated. So both the statements are true. Reinfections, I haven't seen anyone commenting or writing a paper or a publication on it. And I haven't seen anybody telling that the immunity is long lasting. So we got to wait and see. Maybe another few months we will get
We
to
need
know.
to understand the course of the disease, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rakhi Prasad is asking, does it always happen that a patient presents with hypoxia first? People might present with other symptoms like diarrhea, and then when we start on some therapy, the foresight treatments, what you say, and then symptoms, which is like hypoxia develops, maybe.
Yes. One of our own colleagues. Yes, that happens. You can have something else which presents to us because diarrhea and all what happens, they are very simple to pick up. You have it. You can report. Hypoxia, breathlessness also people say is not much because lungs are not so non-compliant. So the subjective complaint part is something which is if you have a rash, you will complain very fast. Hypoxia, unless you are checking it through a probe, which are now becoming more and more used by people, and timing it to the day, because we time it to the day you get the test done and then extrapolate it. But before that, we do not know what is it that you had, pain or hypoxia. And as I said, the PO2 has to drop significantly for a drop in saturation levels. We are not doing ABGs to define. So your PO2
Yeah.
levels might have fallen from 90 to 70 without any appreciable change in the SPO2 levels. But that is very difficult to question. But inherently, because it is a respiratory illness, we expect some amount of change, if not in the saturation, at least in the PO2 levels. Hospitalized patients, I feel we should track both PO2 and SPO2. Once the PO2 falls below 60, then we already have the patients on monitor. Then SPO2 becomes an easier marker to track, on a regular basis, continuous monitoring. But very difficult to answer whether the PO2 level falls or not in the early part of the disease. That some Westerner will tell us. They must be working on it.
Lot of trials actually are going on right now. So we have Dr. Vijay Salla asking, if CRP is 50, IL-6 is more than 1500, is it indicative of cytokine storm?
Yes. Because I will tell you the tocilizumab trials which are there, in some of them have used a CRP cutoff 50, and recovery I think has used a cutoff of 75. So you are well within a CRP of 50, yes. And IL-6 levels, very modest elevation, maybe 10 times also, 100, more than 100 maybe, yes, you can consider it as in the appropriate clinical context, and which I said clinical context is worsening hypoxia. You can consider cytokine storm.
We have question from Dr. Jyoti. What is CSF pleocytosis?
Oh, that is we discussed early. We have labeled these markers like IL-6 pro-inflammatory, no, IL-1 pro-inflammatory, something as LT inflammatory. Well, it is not like that because the IL-6 works on multiple pathways, and depending on the inciting cause. So IL-6 elevation in hematological malignancy, therapy-related elevation in COVID-19 may be actually very different. And IL-6 is the mediator that we measure, but there are so many known and unknown mediators of inflammation. So we believe that it is not very sane to compartmentalize it like pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory, because they have effect. Like we know that antibodies work through T cells. T cells can mediate some antibody responses. Adhesion molecules are there, very complex. In a complex interplay like this, what is being mentioned is please do not compartmentalize something and label one marker as okay, pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, and then take decisions. So pleiotropism, if you ask me the real meaning of the word, it's one thing which has multiple actions or pathways and multiple manifestations. These interleukin 6 may also be considered like that.
Deepam Sharma, is if there is rapid increase of inflammatory markers without hypoxia, should we intervene?
Oh, I answered him. Yeah,
You
no,
answered him.
no, maybe.
Okay. He had actually put the question twice.
Yeah.
Now, Ahmed Bafadel, you prefer invasive ventilation in deteriorating hypoxic patient, or you can try CPAP?
Or we should try CPAP. I think the same thing which we have been doing for ARDS from before: oxygen, high flow oxygen, then NIV, CPAP, whatever, or invasive ventilation. I think we can follow the same sequence unless you have these compelling reasons like hypotension, organ failure, hemodynamic instability. Same approach should be retained in COVID-19, except for people saying that we may be able to pull them more with non-invasive ventilation and high flow oxygen therapy compared to other patients with similar degrees of hypoxia in other illnesses, and where they say it is probably not the only the alveoli, but it is a pulmonary circulation which takes center stage in COVID, and that cannot be beaten by invasive ventilation. PEEP may help in improving the VQ mismatch, so it can work even with pulmonary thrombosis. But when we know the shunt is big, no point of even invasive, non-invasive doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. We are going FB live, Dr. Periwal. So we have questions from Facebook also coming in. So
Yes.
this is from Altaf Khwaja. He wants you to explain the causes of hyperkalemia in these patients.
Oh, I do not know any specific cause for hyperkalemia, but tissue damage we have known every place, because potassium is intracellular, is expected to cause hyperkalemia. Maybe rhabdomyolysis, because muscle injury we have used troponin I as cardiac biomarker, muscle injury marker for cardiac muscles. Or there might be muscle breakdown of anywhere else. We have used the liver enzyme markers as markers of tissue damage of the liver. So hyperkalemia may be due to tissue damage, but otherwise specifically I do not know if there is any particular reason for hyperkalemia.
We have Stella Johnson asking you, can aspirin 75 mg be given if patient does not have ischemic heart disease in case of COVID infection with hypertension without bleeding diaphysis?
Well, your indication for aspirin should be independent, as I told. If he is an independent candidate, but to modulate COVID-19, no. For need for other diseases, yes, they can be given.
Okay.
We got to look at one thing, that thrombocytopenia is very common in these patients. So that part you should take the absolute count also into consideration. You may have two problems at the same time: low platelets and dysfunctional platelets. So caution is exercised. I mean, and beyond that, you can take your call. And these might be patients who might require lines and invasive procedures. Better to have a platelet count of more than 1 lakh with functional platelets to feel happy to be doing all these in these patients.
Dr. Girdhar KV asks, is there any possibility to recover ventilated patient? Right now, the patient is in 20%. 20%, only this much he has written.
I
So
didn't get
is
the
there,
question.
yeah, we do not get the question. Is there any possibility to recover ventilated patient? Right now, the patient is in 20%. That's what he has written. If you can clarify the question a little bit, Dr. Girdhar. Dr. Ashwin asks, should we give steroid to COVID patient with lung involvement on HRCT but no hypoxia?
Oh, this is also very difficult, but no. Because some HRCT we got to know picks up almost very, very small lesions. I will tell you now, the queries maximum comes as after recovery, somebody showing his CT and saying, sir, there is a patch, because we know the patch will remain for long. You can look at severity grading maybe. If you look at the trial, somebody used 50% or more involvement, the CORAD's scoring system that the radiologists are using, which is fairly something which is going to cause hypoxia. So if you have that 5%, 10% involvement, just today I had a patient with 6% involvement of lung in CT, and into the 14th day of his illness, and we chose not to give anything. I said, nothing. Your saturation is maintained. You can actually go home. We are planning to discharge the patient tomorrow, because we got to know if there is something wrong in the lung. Just like in other lung pathologies, it is going to take 4 to 6 weeks to clear. So HRCT clearances or presence, I think, should not be a guide. They can be guide to severity of illness, yes. And they can also be guide to the presence of COVID if we have RT-PCR which is negative. Outside of this, I do not know how the HRCT can be used for other reasons.
Okay, sir. Jyoti Patricia asks, is there any nutrient interaction associated with CSS?
Oh, that I don't know, but I am very much in favor of having anti-inflammatory nutrients. So you can, if you can give them the garlic paste through rice if you want to give, you can give. But personally, I do not know. I have not heard of immune modulating nutrients being used like arginine, glutamine, which traditionally we have been using, the PUFAs and MUFAs. I take a lot of interest in nutrient management, but here nobody has mentioned, but probably would make sense. If it is safe, oh, well, try, no problem. They might also have some immunomodulatory effect.
Modulatory effect. Dr. Prakash asks, any experience with injection Sepsivac, inactivated mycobacteria?
No, I don't have. I think anybody else
Again,
can answer that.
again, Madam Madhukari asks, relation of cytokine level in case of recurrence.
CRP maybe, because interleukin 6, if you look at the JAMA paper, the elevations were very modest compared to other ARDS, which they have taken as historical controls, where they said 10 to 20 times, even in patients who died. Whereas CRP elevations are much more prominent, and although interleukin 6 levels may not help, but we have used lower elevations as cutoffs, maybe 5 to 10 times, with a supportive background of other inflammatory mediators and hypoxia. You can use a cocktail of all of them.
Mona Lisa Raut asks, what is the side effect of irritable bowel syndrome patient after using tocilizumab?
Perforation.
Perforation.
I think it will not be irritable bowel, but inflammatory bowel.
Inflammatory bowel.
Yeah.
Use of steroid in diabetic patient or CKD patient by Jayashree Roy.
Yes, why not? Use insulin. Insulin also has pleiotropic effects. Somebody are saying insulin can also modulate inflammation. Very easy to give now. We are all very happy with using IV insulin. We just don't matter now. And we are having to use a lot of insulin in our patients who are receiving steroids. Because we are also taking that cutoff of 180, beyond which we are using intravenous insulin in these patients. So no problems. You can use. And as you know, the comorbidities actually predispose you to worse outcomes. So maybe use whatever is there in your hands. This choice need not be made.
Rakhi Prasad asks, which is the better mode of non-invasive ventilation, CPAP or BiPAP?
Because they decrease the overall pressures required. CPAPs, because they have been used in pulmonary edema before, and CPAP, if the work of breathing is not too much, you can use CPAP. Look at the comfort of the patient. Some people tolerate CPAPs better than BiPAPs, whereas some people feel actually better with BiPAP than CPAP, because BiPAP gives you the double pressure and gives you the release feeling. Comfort is most important. Your gases are important, but in terms of beating the ARDS, it's the PAP which matters. The CPAP, the PEEP, you can say CPAP is just PEEP which matters. So if you are happy with CPAP, yes, you can use CPAP, no problem.
We have another question from Dr. Brajendra. Do you believe delay in intubation may cause poor outcome of those treated initially in this COVID-19 epidemic?
This is also very interesting. We have stories on both sides. Delay intubation, I mean not ventilation, but try non-invasive. Some of my colleagues say, oh God, you got to be trying non-invasive. The other thing is that spontaneously breathing patients have one benefit, including those on NIV, is what is known as the pendulum effect, which actually goes away with paralysis to a certain extent, which tells you even when there is no airflow, there is some amount of airflow which takes place between the alveoli, which can actually improve oxygenation. So we have tried these pause times and longer inspiratory times with this idea of the pendulum effect in patients who have ARDS lungs. this is something which is lost in invasive ventilation. So somebody who was maintaining on high flow oxygen with NIV may not maintain oxygenation even with 100% oxygen when we invasively ventilate them. That is one part which is now getting a lot of attention. So maybe, I don't know, Brajendra, the answer to that, but we will get to know whether what was better, early invasive ventilation or actually early non-invasive ventilation, delaying invasive ventilation to our classical markers of inability to maintain oxygen or hemodynamic upset. Maybe for the time being, we still follow the old principles of ventilation, maybe.
Okay, sir. Dr. Namrata Chakravarti asks you, what will be the basic causes of negative nitrogen balance?
Negative nitrogen balance, I think she's asking in terms of nutrition.
That's what she has written.
We don't check negative nitrogen balances, but I think the same nutritional principles should apply. High levels of protein therapies, maybe 1.5 to 2 grams per kg body weight. Severe COVID may be considered akin to maybe like burns and trauma, maybe, because there is a lot of tissue trauma in COVID-19. So we are not looking at nitrogen balance, but we may look at giving them adequate proteins, at least 1.2 grams per kg body weight, and maybe somebody is adventurous enough to go up to 1.5 to 2 grams per kg body weight. That is welcome.
The next question is already asked. We did not have had the clarification of the questions. So Dr. Girdhar is asking that ventilated patient you was talking about is on 20% of oxygen he is taking and 80% in ventilation.
But that means he is telling that hypoxia is not a problem, but his stiff lungs are a problem. This is reverse of what we are seeing, but I don't know what would be a better strategy. But if they require support for breathing, they will require some form of ventilation. So you can look at the blood gases and take your call. PO2 levels, the PO2 FiO2 ratio, and then take a call. Very difficult to tell as a whole, but probably individualize it to the need of the patient. That would be better.
So Dr. Nitin asks, anything specific to start remdesivir?
Hypoxia and early. Remdesivir, if you look at what is the practice now in US, or if you are going into invasive ventilation, by the time you start remdesivir, it's too late. So no point. So anybody who is having hypoxia should be started on remdesivir early, unless there is a contraindication.
So we'll take the last question from Dr. Girdhar. What is the glycine role recovery from COVID-19?
I didn't get it. Glycine role is, I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't get the question. If anybody else can answer, it will be so good.
So more or less, we have taken all the questions which we have, Dr. Rakesh. So this was a very interactive session with you to start with. Let us have more upcoming sessions with such kind of lovely interaction with this group of participants we see out here. So thank you, participants. Thank you for joining. Dr. Rakesh, any parting words, anything from your end?
Word is, I would like to get this forum to see more people talking together. Maybe it creates chaos, but it's very interesting to learn from other people in a novel disease where everybody is learning, everybody has an input, everybody has a query, and there are lots of papers. I think COVID has produced maximum number of papers. No, you can call them waste or whatever, but lot of literature, and and many of us are very new, many of us are now experienced, so maybe we will look to I think there could be a way in which we can get queries early also, so that the presenter can actually address it right when he is presenting. I try to put in the idea only of cytokine storm, and I took COVID as center stage. That was my way of looking at it. But maybe if we have inputs from before,
let us do it for the next time. So would request every one of you who has joined after this session is completed, you will shortly get a mail in your registered email IDs asking for a feedback from your end on this session. And also in that feedback, you have an option to say what all topics you would love to hear discussion from our end with Dr. Rakesh. So if we get in your feedbacks and your opinions, that will help us to design our future course of action very well. So once you share your feedback, you will also get an e-certificate for joining this session. And we had many queries asking for the recorded version. Yes, within 24 hours, you'll get the full recorded version. Please log in to the portal given in your email ID again. So once you join there, you will get the full version with Dr. Rakesh once more. It is a recorded version which you can see anytime and every time and pass on to your friends as well. So thank you, Dr. Rakesh. Thank you very much.
And hope to be on the SEF forum very soon again.
Yeah,
I wish
we
all of
will
you a very
very
good
soon
day.
come back with more sessions with Dr. Rakesh.
Yeah.
Thank
and
you.
wish you all good health.
Yes, sir.
Wish you all good health.
Thank you. Thank you. Wish all of us good health. Take care. Stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.